Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's Room of Choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
History Teachers Talking podcast short lectures have now grown up and moved to their own channel. Don't forget to subscribe to our new podcast, History Shorts, wherever you're listening to this episode. Meanwhile, thanks for listening to History Teachers Talking, and here is your newest episode. This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking podcast.
Part of the Evergreen Podcast Network.
All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast.
Today we're going to be looking at the Japanese Emperor Hirohito, his role in World War II. What was his role? There's a lot of debate with that, like what he knew or what he ordered, what he didn't order. Really, how he did help end the war. You can't argue that, like how he said, all right, this is enough. It's time to get to war. And really the power he had over his people, because he was seen as a living god at the time.
He went on the radio twice in the span of a year. In 1945, which we're going to talk about today, is when he first time the people of Japan hear his voice, when Hirohito goes on and says, "We will surrender, we are surrendering." And then a year later, Hirohito goes back on the radio for another speech. And in that one, he says, "I am actually not a god." And then from that point forward, he became kind of like a constitutional monarch. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
He lived all the way into like 1989. So he was around post-war. He was a major player in post-war Japan too, which we can talk about a little bit just to like put a bow on it, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, Hirohito was the emperor of Japan from 1926 until his death in 1989. So he was one of the longest Japanese monarchs, if not, I think, the longest. Hirohito was the eldest son of Crown Prince Yoshihito, born April 29th, 1901 in Tokyo. Because of the custom at the time, the imperial family members actually were not raised by their parents. So Hirohito is taken away, and he spends the first years of his life being raised, particularly, this was picked out specifically for him, by a retired vice admiral to make him tough and train him growing up in the idea of war. Like, you're going to lead the nation one day.
Yeah, the guy, he raised him as his grandson. That was basically what he said. Like, no one, I guess, I don't know, people knew that was Hirohito or not. Like, they just, oh, this is my grandson, but didn't say, no, this is the future emperor. For the first 3 years of his life, his brother was also taken away to be given to somebody else. He came back when he was 3. He was brought back to the Japanese court, basically.
Well, yeah, because the vice admiral, the retired vice admiral, ends up passing away. So Hirohito is then brought back. They create special schools for him underground to the palace that are for all kids of nobility. So from the age of 7 to 19, Hirohito receives very rigorous instruction in military and religious matters. He is taught 2 things. One, the idea of militarism in the sense of like strong Japan and the code of Bushido and samurai. We did that in our podcast a few months back. He's also being taught on his religious role. Like, you are not a person. You are more or less a god. And Hirohito didn't really buy this. And this was something that was really upsetting his teachers and educators. They're like, "No, you're like a god." And he was like, "No, I'm really not."
They said, one, he was very sickly as a child. And 2, he was very like soft-spoken person. It just wasn't in his nature. But he had a lot of patience and self-control too, from everything that I read about him.
He's 11 years old when he's officially commissioned into the Imperial Japanese Army as a second lieutenant.
Yes.
11. He's 11 years old.
11 years old, yeah. And they explained him his responsibilities. And you got to understand, at this point too, the Japanese military is starting to become a really big deal.
Yep.
So that's why this is going to become an even bigger deal in like 10 years from this point.
His father is actually viewed as a very weak leader. A lot of historians that go out and they're saying his father had like mental issues and he ultimately had like lost his mind. So no one really was too sad when his father passed away. It was almost like they were looking forward to Hirohito.
That's one reason why he was being groomed the way he was.
Yep. In 1921, young Hirohito takes like a 34-man entourage and travels to Western Europe. After 6 months, he was like, I kind of don't mind this. Like, I feel free for the first time. He visited Britain, he visited France, he visited the Netherlands.
Yeah. Vatican.
And once he comes back, he assumes the duties of the emperor.
A lot of big things start happening during this time. One is the Four Powers Treaty, which signs in December of 1921 when Japan, the United States, Britain, and France agree to recognize kind of like a status quo in the Pacific, that these are going to be the four major powers in the Pacific, right? So Japan feels big because now they're being on par with Britain, France, and the United States, which is a growing power, right? They get a lot of their power in the Pacific from the Spanish-American War in 1890. So this is like 20 years after that. This kind of is also laying the groundwork for what's going to happen 20 years later. Like this is signed December 13th, right? December 7th, 1941, 20 years later, we all know what happens. It's laying that foundation to the rivalry that's going to happen, particularly between Japan and the United States. There's a big earthquake that devastated Tokyo in 1923. So he's kind of like dealing with all of this stuff. Political disasters. There was an assassination attempt at one point. He ordered the death of the person that tried to do it. He's put through the ringer pretty quick.
Hirohito assumes the throne. There's technically universal male suffrage law that had just passed, which creates really the first political parties in pre-war years in Japan. So now you have almost like a democracy going in. There's a big crisis for this pro-democracy movement. And there's a lot of instability, primarily because, as you mentioned, there is an actual attempt against his life. Hirohito fires their prime minister in 1929 because he thinks that prime minister had something to do with it. The next prime minister is shot and mortally wounded. And then in 1932, another prime minister is assassinated by naval officers that were upset about him signing the treaty to limit Japanese warships. From that point forward, you see the military starting to take over, and eventually they outlaw political parties because they realized that that just caused too much
fighting. Yeah, they were like, no, like we're just going to control everything.
From this point forward, all prime ministers are somehow tied to military. While all this is happening and the military is taking over the situation in Japan, Hirohito is still the emperor. He's still the boss, or god, as you might say. But the day-to-day administration is really passed on to these military leaders. And this is how we eventually get to know, Tojo, and you think of American history and studying Pacific War. But the emperor is still there.
Well, he has to be there because the people want him there. Like, that's another thing too. The military, whatever they're taking over, all that other stuff, but they kind of realize they need the emperor. And even as people in the military that still are very tied to the idea of the emperor as a god on earth, as, the sun and stuff like that. They need that there. It was always something that's kind of difficult. A lot of like Western people understand even at the time. If you see the emperor occasionally, but it's more just having his title. And if he goes away, that could hurt the military's chance to control the people, let's say,
Yep. And it kind of all comes to fruition in 1936. So you have 1,400 soldiers mutiny in Tokyo, and they seize the army ministry and murder several high-ranking politicians. And it's when you see like the military is really starting to control what's going on. And Hirohito by this time has a wife. They have 3 daughters, which is becoming an issue because, again, there's no heir yet. Yeah, eventually there's
that seems to always happen with these monarchs, right? They just keep on having daughters, and they, like, oh, I need to have a kid,
Yeah, and eventually they do have a son. Eventually, they have 7 children. So while this is happening, right? Meanwhile, Japan's conflict with China is growing. It's 1931. The Japanese army officers initiated the incident because that's the one they detonated the railway explosion, right? And the blame it on the Chinese bandits.
Yes, there was a false flag. Yeah, descendants on pretext to invade Manchuria.
And they set up a puppet state, which becomes known as Manchukuo. By 1937, there's a full-blown war between Japan and China. At that point, the Japanese army massacres an estimated 200,000 civilians and prisoners of war in the city of Nanking. This is also known commonly as the Rape of Nanking because rape is thought to have been extremely commonplace during that time in really any Japanese-controlled regions of Asia. So Hirohito did not condone this invasion.
Didn't stop it.
But he didn't stop it. And historians now believe that he didn't stop it because he was worried that the military would actually make him abdicate. Like there was a possibility that the military has gotten so strong, especially with the coup or attempted coup in 1936, where they killed all these politicians, that like they could actually potentially do something to him.
Well, I saw in some of his memoirs, he writes that like he only gave the go-ahead for a defensive war against China, but he didn't want to actually wage war against China. That's what he writes. But he was also doing this because he felt like they needed to prepare for a war against the Soviet Union. That was one of the things he worried about. But he did give the go-ahead to invade Nanking. He was very eager to fight this battle. Just believed it would be a huge blow and it would cause the Chinese to surrender. So that's one reason why it became so brutal. Like because the emperor said, okay, you can do this. So it kind of just gave those in the military too. Like, oh, if the emperor said it's okay, let's go out. And that's one reason why it was so brutal. One reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, he sanctioned the use of chemical warfare. He sanctioned the uprooting of all the peasants in Nanking. He later would say, like, obviously, I didn't want all these rapes to happen, but, like, I did say they could go into Nanking. And that kind of comes up, later on, and I think we'll talk about it in a little bit. This idea of like, is he a war criminal? Was he rather a war criminal? Was he not? We do know that he did play a role in Japanese militarism at the time, but for what reason he played that role? Again, there's a speculation that perhaps he was doing it because of the fact that had he not done it, him and his family would also be in danger.
Yeah.
So essentially what winds up happening is Japan in 1940, September 1940, signs a pact with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, which kind of already makes them, as far as historians are concerned in history, kind of the bad guys. But they agree to assist one another should any of them be attacked by a country not already involved in war.
The emperor chooses Tojo as the next prime minister.
And war minister. War minister,
because Tojo was so devoted to the imperial institution, right? He would listen to the emperor, basically. And then he starts discussing with Hirohito, particularly war against the United States. Apparently, Hirohito does give the authorization, the approval to Tojo to plan an attack on Pearl Harbor.
Hirohito, he's the god, right? You don't really see Hirohito.
Yes.
So Tojo becomes the face of Imperial Japan, which is often when you start looking at various political cartoons from the time, like you see Mussolini, you see Hitler, and you see Tojo. You don't see Hirohito.
No, they talk about Hirohito. A lot of those Bugs Bunny cartoons and stuff, but they also talk about Tojo. Yep. He's the one, he's the public figure.
Yep, he's the prime minister. He's the one that's everyone kind of assumes is the leader of Japan. I mean, technically he is, right? The prime minister, and also because of his ties to the army.
He's calling the shots.
Yeah, he's calling the shots here.
He will run things by the emperor. Like, I guess he could if the emperor decided to say no. Maybe Tojo would have listened, but that never happens. Yeah, he didn't necessarily say yes, but he never said no either until like the end.
For Japan sends troops to occupy French Indochina, and then shortly thereafter, the United States responds with economic sanctions. The U.S. has had enough of what's happening in China. They have enough of now French Indochina is being attacked. Economic sanctions include embargo on oil and steel. Within little over a year, Hirohito consented. He actually agreed to Tojo's demands, or not demands, but suggestions to have war against the United States.
Well, because we talk about this in the Pearl Harbor episode, but it was more or less the Japanese, the military in Japan saw this as an ultimatum, right? That you're going to put sanctions on our oil, on our scrap metal, and us not getting that means we can't wage war. So that's an ultimatum. So therefore, we have to wage war against you to get these materials that we need to continue our war in China and stuff like that. And that's basically what happened. They're going to give the okay for this attack on Pearl Harbor, and they also invade Malaya and the Philippines too on that same time. So that's what it's just a full. It's not just the attack on Pearl Harbor; it's a full scale attack on not just the United States, but also the United Kingdom and the Netherlands are also attacked at this time.
Yeah, within the next 7 months, Japan occupies the Dutch East Indies, British Singapore, New Guinea, the Philippines, and a number of other Southeast Asian and Pacific islands. Yeah. So the war goes on. Japan is the winner in pretty much everything until June 1942. We have Battle of Midway. Soon after, there's the Battle of Guadalcanal. Japan's, I guess, luck changes, you might say. Their luck changes.
The United States their war machine is revving up, right? Japan can't keep up that war production, right? Yeah. So as more soldiers, more American soldiers particularly are coming in, and they just slowly get weed out. As their soldiers die, they can't train them, right? They're the replacements as well. They can't build them more aircraft carriers. That's what happened at Battle of Midway. So yeah, they're just slowly being bled dry.
So this is where you have Hirohito kind of re-enters the scene here. By early 1945, Hirohito begins to individually meet with senior government officials to kind of consider where to go with this war.
Because the Japanese people, they didn't really know what was going on. Like they would hear things, I guess, but they didn't really know. They didn't hear about Midway, right? They don't hear about a lot of these battles. And then one battle that Hirohito was really hoping for was like the battle at Leyte. He wanted to send forces to Leyte Gulf, which winds up becoming just like a huge defeat for the Japanese. And after that, that's when he was like, what you're saying, he was like, this is not going to be good. We need to like figure out what are our options here.
We have to acknowledge the fact that pretty much everyone around him wanted to continue the war.
Yes.
He has a war council. There's the Big Six. And the Big Six are Prime Minister Suzuki. You have Minister of Foreign Affairs Togo, Minister of the Army Anami, Minister of the Navy Yonai, and the Chief of the Army General Staff Umezu, and the Chief of Navy General Staff Toyoda. Basically, all of Japanese policy making centered around these people.
Yeah.
Right, that's his council, right? Mm-hmm. And out of this council, at the beginning, at least still in early 1945, all of them are still very much like, we need to continue this war. But then slowly but surely, one by one, they start to kind of fall off and start to agree. Like Prime Minister Suzuki, when he's brought in to become prime minister, because Tojo's eventually let go. The situation for Japan is not going well. Tojo, by the Big Six, is kind of like, you go over there.
Kind of like used as a scapegoat, even though it wasn't
Exactly.
just him. So yeah, you need to move him away. And then they actually start to make some overtures to the Soviet Union, right? This is in June 1945. Like, let's approach the Soviet Union and act as a mediator. And that did nothing. Because Stalin was like, no way.
Because Stalin wants, he
wants that land. Yeah, he's like, you're beaten basically. But you're not going to be able to repel my invasion. On July 26, 1945, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration, which is basically like, if you want to surrender, it's unconditional. Japan was willing to almost do that. They wanted one major condition, right? And that was a guarantee that the emperor's position in Japanese society would still exist. And the Allies were like, no, it's an unconditional surrender. We're not going to guarantee that. So then the emperor decided not to surrender. And that was in July of 1945. And we know what was also happening in the United States in July of 1945. That was the finishing of the atomic bomb with the Manhattan Project.
Japan is still trying to figure this out, though. There's no question about it. Their backs against the wall. The prime minister that is brought in, Suzuki, he's actually brought in by the emperor. Emperor picks him specifically and has a meeting with Suzuki, who's a former admiral, very older gentleman. And he basically says to him, like, look, I'm bringing you in to figure out a way to get us out of this war.
Yeah, to negotiate peace terms. It's not a surrender. They never actually say the word surrender. It's all about peace terms. What can we do? Peace terms. Because they wanted to keep really what they had. But then with that declaration saying, no, it's only unconditional surrender, they're kind of backed up to a wall bit too. And some historians debate whether the Allies really had to do that. Like, you could have ended the war earlier if you would have
given terms.
But then it was also, you had 4 brutal years of fighting, all the people that were killed on both sides. Like, now that you're in a position where you could dictate something like that, why am I going to give you terms, right? So it's complicated.
So the United States, when they fight in Battle of Okinawa, which was the first time that Emperor Hirohito actually got really involved in the military tactics during World War II, supposedly, he wanted the Battle of Okinawa to be like this big battle to showcase what Japan is capable of. So that way it was supposed to deter the United States from wanting to, have unconditional surrender. We're supposed to essentially force the United States to be like, all right, let's finish this war because it was so bloody. But it had an adverse effect because it was so bloody for the Americans that the Americans were like, now that we have the atomic weapon, the atomic bomb, like, we can't have another Okinawa. So technically it backfired on Hirohito, who was like, we'll show them what we're capable of. So that way they will discuss peace terms.
It really showed them, all right, this is what you're capable of. So, the fight is going to be that much more brutal. We have to use this new weapon, or, we need to give them this knockout blow now.
The last week for Japan is just one bad thing after another. We dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and then a couple of days later, we drop one on Nagasaki. That same day that the bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, Soviet Union invades Japanese areas in China. Interesting here too is, it's probably another podcast in itself, is that we wanted initially FDR, when he was still alive, he really wanted Stalin to enter this war and help us out. And up to really us dropping the bomb, we still kind of wanted Stalin's help with the war against Japan. But once we dropped those 2 bombs, we're kind of like, we don't really need you anymore.
Yeah, we don't want that because we don't want him taking over land to expand his sphere of influence. It's really, that's the beginning of the Cold War. Like,
exactly.
We talk about in the Atomic Bombs podcast. That's the beginning of the Cold War right there. But yeah, and also we didn't even talk about, like, Japan's been bombed heavily at this point with fire bombs. The fire bombings of Tokyo and of like Kobe, Japan, those were worse. More people died in the fire bombings than the atomic bombings. Plus, you had the blockade of Japan, so people were starving, right? The food wasn't getting in. This naval blockade was definitely working. But it was, again, it was battles like of Okinawa, and the fact that there was this doctrine in Japan that they were going to fight to the last man. There was even some extremists that were calling for a death before honor mass suicide. Like, let's just all kill ourselves. Like, that sort of thing. And no, that wasn't going to happen to the whole population, but there were individuals who felt that way. And this stuff is, the West is hearing about this and like, well, they're never going to give up. Like, we're going to have to actually invade or drop these bombs, and it's just not going to be easy. And meanwhile, Hirohito's like, no, we want to end this war, but we need to have, what are the terms? And then the only thing they're getting back from the West is unconditional surrender. Those are the terms. There are no terms. You surrender, we tell you what happens. And that's not easy for a leader to do.
He finally says, you know what? I don't even care what happens to me. After the second bomb, he's like, you know what? We need to protect the people of Japan. So if I lose my life because of this, it's fine. But now it's the big six that are not willing to do that. They're like, well, we can't lose the emperor. So there's a massive division. These guys are meeting just hours right after Nagasaki. They're meeting in like an underground bunker, and they're trying to discuss and look at the Potsdam Declaration. They're like, what do we do? What do we do? And they're split 3-3. So the prime minister and the foreign minister, they're very much like, we got to end this war. Like, we got to just accept these terms. There's nothing we could do about it. But we do send something back to the United States stating that we need to keep our emperor. Meanwhile, the other three guys that are there, the military guys, are like, no, like, we're going to fight and we're going to bring them to Japan, and we're going to have one major big battle, which is going to force the United States to basically let us surrender on our terms.
That's really what it is. Like they're willing to surrender, but it has to be on their terms. And their main term is basically we have to keep the
Retained
emperor in power. The emperor has to be kept in power. And
So-
they're just saying no, no, no. And the emperor actually on August 15th does do a recording, right? That's what we talked about.
Yes, but before he does the recording, so the emperor's brought into a meeting inside their bunker where the big six are meeting, and he's brought in because if there is a 3-3 vote in a big six, you have to have a breaking vote. So the emperor is brought into that room, and he's basically like listening to all these people saying like why they should or shouldn't surrender, and finally he's the one that breaks the stalemate, and he's like, no, I want this war to end. I want it to end right now. I don't care about the terms. I understand what you guys are saying, but like we need to end the war.
Yeah.
Just end it. So he breaks the stalemate, and finally these people are like, all right. A response is sent over back to the United States. This is all happening after the 2 bombs are dropped.
Yeah, this is on August 12th. Yeah.
Yep. The response is sent August 11th, I think. Response was wound up being sent. And then the United States gets this response, and they're like, we said unconditional. And these guys are saying they're willing to surrender if they keep the emperor. So, because that's ultimately what was sent over anyway, even though the emperor's like, I don't care about me. The United States response is, okay, we will let you keep the emperor, but according to how we want you to keep him.
Yeah, we won't kill him, but we're not guaranteeing that he's still going to be powered at the Japanese hierarchy. We're not guaranteeing that.
And then after that, again, Japan's like, oh, what do we do? Meanwhile, Hirohito even meets with his family members, like his brothers and everything. He's like, no, like I'm done. Like I want to be done. He's going against his military for the first time, really, in the entire war.
Yeah, and there are some people that don't like that. That's the whole point.
Hirohito winds up, as you said earlier, he winds up recording a message to the people that is on a record, that is to be played on a radio on the 15th. But the night before that, you have a coup that is organized by essentially a bunch of young officers, military officers, that feel that their generals of the Big Six have failed them in securing Japan's,
victory
with honor. They're going to take over the palace. They don't hold Hirohito hostage. They're more like we're going to protect Hirohito from the bad influence around him.
And they want that recording, because if you did record a message
surrender
to the people, we'll talk about it in a second. Yeah, because he never actually uses the word surrender. It is a surrender, but never uses the word surrender. And they know it's going to go out the next morning, so they're trying to find it and seize it, and stop it from going out, which they can't find.
Yeah, so the whole night from the 14th to the 15th, you literally have these young officers are shooting people. They take over the Imperial Palace. They're looking for this recording, for this record. They can't find it. And eventually some of the other military people get wind of this, and they're like, all right, we can't have this. So
we have to stop it, yeah.
They stop it. They stop it in the morning hours. And Hirohito actually had no idea that there was a coup until like the morning. Like he was sleeping.
They didn't know it was actually what was going on. Yeah. The radio message comes out. It's kind of interesting because they said even though it came out to the Japanese people, a lot of the Japanese people couldn't really understand it, because he used this like more like a aristocrat, right, form of language that really was only well educated or like more traditional samurais. I guess it would kind of be similar to like if you read like Shakespeare today.
Exactly.
Like you can the words, but it's like, what are they really saying here? But some of the things he says is that the enemy has employed a new and most cruel bomb. But the main thing is he never says surrender. He just says that the war situation has not developed necessarily to Japan's advantage, and that we no longer have to endure the unendurable. So he never says surrender. He just says the war is now coming to an end. And this is big. This is the first time the commoners ever heard the emperor's voice. So remember, this guy's like God on earth, and they never heard his. They see pictures of him. They probably have pictures of him in their house, but never heard him speak until this moment. All right, and he's giving this speech saying, "All right, the war is now coming to an end."
He gives a separate, much shorter speech 2 days later that people don't really, it's kind of like a footnote, people don't really know about. And that one's given directly to the Japanese military. And that one does say, like, we need to comply with the intention and will of the United States, Britain, and Soviet Union. Like, it kind of basically says it's over.
So the war is going to be over now, but like there was still like, what are we going to do with Hirohito? Like, are we going to put him on war trials? What's going to go on here? And there was a lot of pressure from allied countries like Australia.
Oh, yeah, they
wanted him dead. They listed him as a war criminal. They wanted to put him on trial. And it was really probably Douglas MacArthur who actually threatens to kill Hirohito to the Japanese the day of the surrender. Mm-hmm. I know we talked about that. Like he said, there's still like debate, but a lot of people, or the Japanese say they're going to surrender, but are they going to surrender? Remember, they were having peace negotiations with us in 1941, and they bombed us at Pearl Harbor. So MacArthur actually says to some of these Japanese diplomats, like, if you pull anything, when we're signing this paper, these accords on the Missouri, I'm going to slit the emperor's throat right in front of you. That's what he says to them. And they're like,
nuts.
Oh, cool.
But then you have Douglas MacArthur, who really saves his life. Because
he threatened to kill him, and now he's saving his life. It's the kind of
exactly. Like, if Hirohito was so involved, how did he avoid prosecution for war crimes? Well, largely because of Douglas MacArthur, right? Douglas MacArthur was appointed the supreme commander for the Allied powers in September 1945. He was the main leader in the occupied Japan. So MacArthur's job was to help stabilize the country. And one of his first actions was whether Hirohito should be tried as war criminal. And the arguments were on both sides, but he decided not to charge and try Hirohito because he thought that Japan would be ungovernable if
they did that. Like, he wanted a peaceful transition. He didn't want all these extremist elements bombing things and doing assassinations, right? Going after the troops. He didn't want that. And they knew if he had the emperor at least there as a figurehead, if nothing else, right? Telling the people, no, we're going to go along with this. Like, this is for the good of Japan, that it could quell some of that. And it really worked. Like, if you want to look at like the best possible post-war occupation, the post-war occupation of Japan was, on the X's and O's standpoint, it worked.
I mean, again, we're occupying a nation, which sucks.
Yeah. But to achieve post-war, like, if you wanted the American post-war objectives in Japan, it happened. Okay, I know other things going on here. That's a simplification, but it was successful. And one reason was you can give credit to MacArthur for having Hirohito by his side during this time doing this.
It gave some credibility to what the Americans were doing.
Yes.
So without Hirohito on trial, there was really not much division in Japan. And in addition, it was in best interest of the U.S. for Japan to be transformed into a democratic stronghold against communism in the region, right? Because you were encircled by communism in countries like China and Soviet Union. So all of a sudden, like, you want Japan to become a democracy. And then a few years later, when you have the Korean War, Japan's entire economy is reworked for war production to create jeeps, arms, food, anything you can think of for the Korean War, which does to Japan what World War II did to the United States. It blows up their economy and it brings about a lot of wealth to Japan.
Well, they become westernized. But there's still a lot of debate. Like, a lot of the papers that were, or anything that showed that the emperor or his family committed war crimes, that was kind of destroyed or hidden, right?
Oh yeah. There were American officials were like rebranding Hirohito as this peaceful democratic figure.
Yeah, he had no power. I remember you hear that in school too. Like, remember when I was in high school, middle school, when they talked about it. Oh, the emperor didn't really have that much power and stuff like that. It's even debated, but most historians say now he had a lot more power than probably what the history books originally said, right? Maybe you go back 20, 30 years. So he was definitely culpable for the war. He was definitely reflecting on his wartime role. Like Hirohito, he never answered questions directly, which angers a lot of Chinese, even to this day, right? Was his power limited by cabinet members and stuff like that? Yeah. But he definitely helped plan things that we talked about before. And definitely members of his family were directly responsible for a lot of atrocities, particularly against China during the Second World War.
So from 45 to 51, Hirohito basically tours the country, oversees reconstruction efforts. He's like a figurehead. He's not really, he doesn't really have power.
Yeah, he doesn't have power, but he doesn't have governmental power, right? But he does have power with the people because his words carry weight.
When you look at it, when he finally passed away, a lot of different world leaders went to the funeral, and people were like, at the time, 89, they're like, should we go to the funeral? I mean, Japan did so many terrible things during the war, and Hirohito kind of knew about all of those things. Like, how much of that was done because of his orders? So I remember that there was a lot of commotion. Who should go to this funeral? And if they go, should they bow to his casket? And a lot of world leaders did not. So I think that pretty much covers our short little foray into Hirohito and the fall of Japan. If you guys are interested in learning more about this, there's tons of books that you could obviously read. There's one called Japan's Longest Day, which literally kind of talks about the last day and the coup that is going on. There's also Fall of Japan, another great book that was written in the 50s that deals with pretty much this entire time period. Regardless, thank you so much for tuning in once more. We do appreciate it. If you guys need to find us, you can find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. If you guys have any questions, suggestions, please feel free to email us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.